The former Donald Trump, who was a former squatter from 2017 to 2021, said that he knew more about trade than most economists and foreign policy experts, which he didn't. Trade wars are good and easy to win, Trump famously declared back in 2018, but obviously he lost that one. He described himself as a tariff man, which he wasn't, and proved it by imposing new tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars of U.S. imports to be paid by the American firms that were buying these goods up. Now, Trump's dubious logic was that making imports costlier to Americans would hurt the foreign sellers and give him leverage so he could use it to demand concessions. Obviously, that backfired. His biggest target, of course, was China, because Trump added new tariffs on about $450 million worth of U.S. imports from China, and China predictably retaliated with similar penalties on the U.S. imports. Now, the escalation rattled financial markets in 2018 and 2019, ultimately leading to what we call the first phase one deal of the trade between the two countries that was signed on January 15th of 2020. Now, under that deal, China would sharply increase its purchases of U.S. goods as a precondition for Trump or his successor removing the new tariffs and getting back to normal. Now, the new trade data for 2021 shows that China came nowhere near fulfilling its commitments in the 2020 Phase 1 deal with U.S. exporters, ended up worse off than they would have been had Trump done nothing on the trade. Now, analysts of the trade data by Chad Brown of the Peterson Institute for International Economics found that during the first 2 years covering the trade deal, 2020 and 2021, China only purchased about 57% of what it had committed in the trade deal. And China said that it would buy at least $502 billion of U.S. goods during those 2 years, yet the total purchases added up to just about $289 billion. If there had been no trade war and no tariffs, U.S. exports to China would have been $119 billion more than actual levels from 2018 to 2021. If the U.S. share of Chinese imports had simply had remained constant, that's a net loss of business for American companies, and it doesn't include nearly $30 billion in the U.S. taxpayer funds that Trump doled out to farmers to compensate them for their lost sales to China from 2018 through 2020. Now, 2 years ago, the former squatter Donald Trump signed what he called a historical trade deal with China, which it was a flop. This is what Brown had wrote in the Peterson Institutional website. In today's term, the only undisputed historical aspect of that agreement is that it was a fucking failure. Was the trade war worth it for the U.S. exporters? The answer is so far no, it wasn't. The COVID pandemic obviously interfered with the trade between the United States and China, as it did with many trades between most nations. It doesn't appear to be the main reason China's purchases of U.S. exports are so far below what we had agreed to. Now, the total U.S. exports of goods and services are nearly back to pre-pandemic levels, and the exports of goods alone hit record levels in 2021, and that reflects COVID-related distortions in the economy as a whole. And with a cutback to such services such as travel boosting demand for goods, the U.S. exporters are producing much more than before, but just not for the Chinese market. The 2020 deal that Trump focused on four different areas of where China was supposed to bulk up the American purchases and ultimately boost the U.S. employment in those fields. Manufacturing, agriculture, energy, and services. The shortfall in the services, though, including travel and education, clearly suffered the most from COVID, but that was less than 20% of the total purchase commitment. Now, the agriculture involved in the smallest commitment by China and those exports rose the most by any of the four groups, and that followed a swine fever crisis in China that gutted domestic pork production, and that led to a surge in imports from many places. While the Chinese food purchases rose following the 2020 deal, they still fell short of what China had pledged to buy from the American farmers. The U.S. automotive and aircraft exports in China are actually lower than they were back in 2017, which is the baseline for calculating China's increased purchase commitments, and that's partly due to the shortage of the semiconductors for automobiles and to the fiasco with Boeing 737 MAX airliner. It scotched sales for months, and yet critics ripped the 2020 deal at the time of its signing for the prescriptive purchase targets, allowing little to no flexibility for externalities such as a pandemic or a blockage in one particular sector. What?
What are you doing?
I'm doing a video and I'll go away. Midget?
Shut up.
and those critics turned out to be right. The Phase 1 deal had no enforcement mechanism, and Trump is obviously not squatter anymore. So there may be no consequences of China missing the deal's targets by a wide margin. The current President Biden, for his part, has been cagey about his China trade policy. He has left most of the Trump tariffs on Chinese imports in place, while removing many other tariffs, such as those that Trump imposed on European allies. Biden places more importance on human rights and green energy than Trump ever did, and it's possible he could link the removal of tariffs to Chinese actions in those areas. But the one thing that's clear from Trump's wayward trade experiment, however, is that it makes no sense to hurt yourself in order to hurt somebody else. So yeah. So if you like the video, give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, RBW King. And if you want to support my work even further, I have a Patreon link in my about section on YouTube. And you could click on that link to support my further work and stuff like that. So I got it on that. So yeah.